Welcome to the Pathfinders podcast and what I am going to dub the Soul Series Sessions Volume 2. And what we're going to do is explore spirituality, nature, health, healing, all of that with this very beautiful guest, Deepika Delmenico. Hi, Deepika.
Hi, Mike.
Before we
Hello.
get started, Deepika, there's two things I want to talk about. And what I want you to start with, if you could, is just what your history is in terms of both your spiritual side and also your business side, and just how those things mate together.
It's interesting, like spirituality. What is spirituality? I don't think there's anything really that exists in all of life and all of creation that does not have a spiritual dimension to it. It's really it's part of every cell, fiber, and molecule of energy in our entire being, and those of the elements of life and nature. And it's really about, it's such an individual thing as to how we relate to it. And so it's really, for me, a question of relationship to the spiritual is about relationship to self.
Yeah.
And I can remember years ago, a great woman, I was interviewing her for a summit that I was doing, one of the Conscious Woman Rising summits. And she said, look, at the end of the day, it's just about minding your own business. Understand your cycles, understand the moon cycles, and mind your own business. And I thought that's beautiful, because it's so difficult to mind our own business. But I think that spirituality and know thyself, the who am I? Who am I beyond this physical suit of flesh and ligaments and bones, and what I see in the mirror and what I hear, and and all of the senses. Who am I? And how do I relate to that business of being me? And in that is a very spiritualized component as to how we perceive self and all of life. And that then translates, of course, to and influences business, whatever our business is. And so business as in running a business, an entrepreneurial side of things, or whatever we do, whatever our business is, whether we run our own business or we are in service to somebody else's business, it's an extension. It's all part of the spiritualized business of being self.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it really it's such a multi-layered answer what you've given. And what I mean by that is that there's the third dimensional reality, and there are so many people out there. Like if you go onto LinkedIn or something like that, there's so many people who are focused on themselves and the money and the product and all of that, and they're not talking about the spiritual stuff. And then we get to this next layer where we have this real separation from the ego and what we feel is missing. And therefore, we move into space to healing and fixing the body, and and working with what we don't think is right. And then there's another layer beyond that where we don't need healing, where we're connected to source, to spirit. And so when you say mind my own business, when you say to focus on your own self, to me, it's like there's so many layers to that, because at what point do you stop expanding to the level to which you incorporate everything, like you are the consciousness of all things in all places at all times? And that's a whole other level. We'll get to that over time.
Yeah, because it's quite a path. Like, we're told that it can happen in the click of a finger or the blink of an eye, but the majority of humans, that's quite an arduous path.
Yeah. So let's now, because you're also a naturopath, that's kind of what I wanted to get to with this too, is that level of looking at how we interact with this world, and
totally,
and how that interaction is, how it's perceived by us, how it's created by us, and how that affects the physical, because that's the primary experience at the moment of this third dimensional reality.
Mm.
So so if we look at it from that level, like if we start with this body, this job as a naturopath, this third dimensional reality, how do you think we go with spirit and with spirituality in relation to how our body is?
Well, when we take birth, we go incredibly well, so much so that it's we're completely we feel very ill-equipped to take care of the body. We're completely dependent on others to take care of us, but we're incredibly connected to spirit. And then, of course, the first years of life are really about fully inhabiting, really taking up residence in this body. And what I love is, you know, the way that I have had the great privilege and blessing of learning about human-centered medicine and being taught to practice and view the human being in the way of every human being, a spiritual being having a human experience. And so there's a real holistic lens through which the human is met and perceived. And it's so difficult to inhabit the body, or it's so difficult for many people, particularly as they grow, to remain connected with identifying with themselves as being so much more than the body, which is then, of course, talking about, you know, it's coming down to the grosser dimensions and elements, and it's really identifying with the physicality of self and of life and the world. And we know that, and we see that all around us. And so in viewing the whole living being, the whole human, that includes all the subtle bodies.
Yeah.
And all the different components. So, and it includes spirit, it includes soul, it includes, you know, one's astrality, one's etheric life force, consciousness of body. It includes the chemical bodies, the light bodies, the physical. There's so many, and these are all constantly playing out in a living dynamic. Not too much, not too little, not too left, not too right. And human-centered medicine is about helping one to fully embody this instrument in a way that they experience direct communion with their higher self. And I call that spirit, and I call that the divine, God, God consciousness, whatever. There are so many ways that you can relate to it, but I think everybody can identify there's something greater than this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when we start to address and view and work with the human in this way, then you're really unkinking the hose or the channels that are creating discord and separation of self from your higher faculties, from spirit. And then the intelligence of that can really inform and influence every cell of one's being that just has all the intelligence to get on with the business of being you. And it's not about the absence of illness, but it's about addressing discord.
Yeah, I love that.
And separation from self.
Yeah. And that's where I think the body shows symptoms. You know, when I was contemplating a session with somebody the other day, and how I experienced it was I was feeling into the pain of my body, but that pain was of their body, right? And so as I dropped it, it was the resonance kicked in on what they should be, how they should be acting, how they should be focused on themselves. And you start to see how with certain pains, certain symptoms that you have in the body, that they're just there to draw your attention to what is not flowing. And when you do create that relaxation and that flow, that resonance naturally comes back. And I think that's a huge part now of what you would call human-centered medicine. I think it's a huge part of the collapse of, Western medicine, where, it has its place for certain emergency type things, but a lot of the time that's not necessary, that kind of intervention. And it's really run by pharmaceutical companies, by the impulse to make money and survival, rather than it being about finding that balance in ourselves at every level.
Totally, totally. I mean, emergency medicine is a wonderful thing, and I'm really grateful for it. In my own life, and if I can just illustrate an experience that speaks to this very thing, when I was 52, I had a cardiac episode, and essentially, I had a problem with circuitry, and so my heart was going way too fast to remain conscious. And when you're driving a car, that's not a great thing. And so the long and the short of it is I ended up being taken by ambulance to a hospital, to emergency. And I was stabilized. It was pretty touchy for a while. But there was a point where I recognized what was happening, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is about, because I was listening to the emergency doctor speaking, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is about resonance, and I've got a problem with circuitry. Communication, process, and flow are not happening. How have I been living that's deviated from my own nature and been in so much discord that I am here in this situation now? And it was curious, and I share it because it was full on at the time, and there were consequences because it unleashed, because I was afraid. I'd had threshold experiences before, in hospital, in emergency, grateful for emergency, where I hadn't been afraid. But I was really fearful in this instance. I wanted to stay. I was really fighting to stay in my body. And so it unleashed like a lifetime of anxiety, which then had to be managed in the following years. But the medical solutions and what was being offered to me by the cardiologists to move forward just did not resonate, because I knew that energetically I had to work on removing impediments, strengthen this instrument, and build up circuitry. And what I mean by circuitry is greater channels of communication with this higher intelligence, with this intelligence that is fully informed by and of spirit. And and so that was kind of controversial too, because I didn't really have the blessings and the stamp of approval from medical specialists to do so. But it was just so obvious that, yes, I was there in a situation, and I was so grateful to the care that was given to me at the time. But it wasn't a matter of taking a beta blocker for the rest of my days. And if and when it would happen again, and I was told that it would continue to happen, to then have the surgical procedures to remedy it.
Sure.
Because it was, so clear, we're composed of energy. So how has the formless taken form over time? And I've lived in a way that is forced against my nature and formed these impediments.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing, because, you talk about your nature, and being somebody who works with people's nature, their purpose, that sort of thing, to really be shifting from this place of survival and that kind of mechanism, to moving to this place where we come to know our nature, and beyond the dimensional reality, how we have come in from all of these past lives here to really like to learn something. You know, this is why we forget. It's what they call the ring past. Not when we come in here and we forget everything, you know. And when we come in and know what our nature is, when we come in and really find this aspect, not only for this life, but ongoingly, of what it is that we are seeking, it's so much easier to find resonance for that.
Yeah. And isn't that everything? It's that's what it's all about. If we want to understand what is spirituality, then there's really an obligation to ourselves to start getting in touch with what do I even love? What do I even want?
Yeah.
What is that? And for some people, that's easier than others to get in touch with that. And it's easier than others to work with their circumstances, including, you know, not only life circumstances, including their body instrument, to get traction,
Yeah.
to start to work in a way that they do start to feel whatever individually one imagines the senses and feelings are, to be in right relationship with spirit, to be in right relationship with all of life.
Yeah, and for the
So
most
ease,
part,
joy,
yeah.
ease and joy, lightness of being, feeling energized, not feeling exhausted,
Hmm.
looking forward to going to bed, dreading having to get up in the morning to continue the same.
Yeah, and for those people that are aware of their body at that level, to get up every morning to continue that same style of life, knowing that it is daily damaging you, that
It's
it's
not
definitely
really
going to
sustainable, is it? Not
harm.
without these physical expressions then
Yeah,
taking
no, absolutely.
place.
I mean, it's not sustainable anyway, because I know everyone's going to die. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's that simple. But your point about the happiness, the joy, the quality of life, and let me also say that I love this aspect of the journey. Like the way I'm imagining it in my mind is that we have this threshold, but where we come into third dimensional reality as an infant, and we are so close to spirit. You know, and as we go about our business, particularly when we get to adulthood and have our own kids, that we really move into the space where we forget all of that for the most part. You know, we rush about our day, and then it's only as we get older and we start moving back to spirit. Right, that is the whole point of elders and wisdom for those people that do the journey is
Yeah.
to move back towards spirit. And in actual fact, you're moving much closer to your own spirit with a sense of wisdom and the childhood innocence, if you're lucky.
Mm.
Um, so that we always have this link, you know, for our grandparents and our grandkids
Yeah.
of this beautiful space of understanding, whilst the whilst the adults work in all directions for all purposes to ignore what's really going on with their body.
Yeah. So if we're not experiencing wellness, despite what's happening, you know, your knee may be playing up or your back may be sore. But if you're still not experiencing a degree of wellness, like this place of stillness, that all is well
Yeah.
underneath, then it's a deviation from your nature. It's a deviation from the nature of being. As you were just describing, it reminded me, so in Ayurvedic medicine, the body is composed of governing humours, biological humours, composed of the elements of nature. And typically there's 3 phases in every human's life. And from birth until about 16, it's a phase where the earth and water elements are stronger. And that's to build cohesiveness and structure, so that the body can, so that, you know, the soul can come in,
Mm.
spirit can come in, you know, we can really inhabit our bodies. It's like, wow, I'm here on the earth and I have a place here and it's pretty cool. This is my gig. And it creates this buffer, this cohesive buffer and juiciness of being for the next phase of life, from like 16 to 17 until about 50, where pitta is dominant, fire and water is dominant. So that's creativity is at its absolute peak in terms of intensity and drive. And I'm going to change the world. I'm going to create. And of course, it's different for everybody, but it's, you know, it's so strong that we can create life itself.
Yeah.
And it's pretty friggin' tumultuous. So much happens. So we want to have those buffer zones in place from that first formative phase of life, because then it changes again. At about 50, it's changing again for the third phase of life, which is where the air and ether elements are dominant. What does it mean? We're spiritualizing. It's accelerating, like it or not, ready or not, you know, it's happening. The physical forces that were tied in with reproductive function physically separate. It's a time of spiritualization. And what's happening simultaneously as we're having our own ascension, you could say, which we are, things are moving up. But if we're not in right relationship with ourselves, we experience it as fear and worry and even depression and absolute contraction, because what's happening is the body's also hardening. And by the way, it's you can call it what you want, but it's a strong time of intuition. Intuition is even stronger because this is vata. So that's why it's, you know, the elders, the wisdom, it's lived. And through one's presence, it's simply shared. But the body is physically then hardening, mineralizing, it's sclerotic, it's actually coming back to the earth. And so nature supports us every step of the way to live a life of connection to ourselves, a life of communion.
Yeah.
With, you know, with whatever we relate to. This whole thing called life being about.
Yeah. So when you because we had a conversation the other day, and there was a bit of it that I recorded, and that became our introduction. So I was like, okay, beautiful. One of the things that was discussed in that space is really seeing what is at play, and say in terms of the ego, everything that we're taught as children, that we then develop as adults. That is essentially based around the survival mechanism, the words, the "I'm so intelligent," like all of that kind of stuff that you convince yourself of, yeah. And then the shift from there to the space of just noticing that's actually not me. It's the body's intelligence. It's the part of my intelligence, part of my survival mechanism, all of that. And so from that point of view, then as we move into this elderhood, as we get older, and especially if we're switched onto that side of things and not just in fear and depression of death, that mechanism, how is that for you? How, I mean, I'm asking you because you're the guest this time, but how is it to just be aware of recognizing that you are not the body, you are not the personality, you are not the fears, you actually exist completely separate from that.
Yeah. I think one of the great gifts of life for everybody is that with the maturation and the challenges and the adversity, the trials of life, all the opportunities that life presents, so that you realize you're not the ego, you're not the personality, you're not the personhood. It gives you a lot of clues along the way to, well, hang on, that felt so painful to be rejected there, or to miss out on this, or to be so attached to that. But something happens, you don't die. It might feel like you're dying. And you sort of come to realize, oh, that was a bit of a personality death. Oh, that felt like my ego was the football on the field. And there was a big huddle and got completely kicked around. And so And there's ideally, in an ideal life and world, there's more space and time created for you to start to reflect. And unless you're forcing yourself and living against nature constantly, perpetually, then you don't have the same level of energy to keep creating and changing the world. You do still create, of course, but in a more nuanced way, aligned with that which you love. And really, you're not working so hard to make things happen. So there's more space to reflect upon the fact that it's all about qualities.
Mm.
And the qualities of egoic identification are often quite dim and quite heavy and quite clunky. And there's lots of ways that you can describe it. But there's sort of these moments of like, oh, that doesn't even really sit with who I am.
Yeah.
Or that doesn't even matter. 2 days ago, I thought that really mattered. And yet today it seems really insignificant.
Yeah.
And so I think that life does afford us the opportunity to recognize what is ego and what is egoic tension and what is egoic yearning, as opposed to real soul tension, real soul yearning. But unless we're consciously taking care of our own business again and really doing regular practices that, whatever that may be, that bring us stillness and silence and respite from the busyness of the world, then it's harder but to recognize what is ego and what's not. But as we age, more challenges will come up, like the things we've been talking about, these expressions, where we're sort of forced.
Sorry, I missed a bit there. So we're sort of forced to
We're
what?
forced to look at ourselves.
Oh, okay, got it.
We're forced to we're forced to get really truthful.
Yeah.
But what's really going on?
Yeah.
What's really going on? And when we do that, then we start to ask, powerful questions of ourselves. Like, what do I want? What do I want? What's really important to me? What kind of mind do I want? What kind of emotions do I want? What kind of physical body? Do I want to have the energy to be able to go for a walk with my grandchildren?
Yeah. It's a question that comes up, I think, for everyone as we age, because it is it's the chance for us to move from the body, where we're asking questions like, what do I want to feel like, do I take my grandchildren for a walk, all that sort of stuff, to that aspect of us that is deeply personal, that is spiritual, that we ask questions like, how do I want to approach death? How do I want to see others go? And I think that side is sadly lacking for a lot of the world. Death is ignored until it possibly can't, impossible to ignore it. It's one of those things that kind of creeps up, excluding accidents, as we just age and get old. It's one of those things where, for the most part, people are doing their best to pretend it's not going to happen until they can't pretend any longer, rather than just being in a space where we get to accept it and know that as we come to know that part of ourselves that exists now, without the body, like, yeah, that's the body over there, and this here is the true me, the soul essence, the aspect of ourselves that is connected to God, all that sort of stuff, or spirit, or whatever you want to call it. And then when death comes, it's not a surprise and it's not a shock, and it's actually a peaceful state, because more and more people are seeing with a near-death experience that life goes on, soul goes on, and that this is This is not what would once have been called a fantasy, say 40, 50 years ago. It's so real, and that we can go out and experience that now. So it's interesting that you would mention it from that point of view.
Yeah, so perhaps instead of spending so much energy and resources in focusing on reversing aging and anti-aging, we could be using those resources to become more aware of our own spiritual nature and really ask ourselves the questions like, does death exist? Yes, the physical body.
Yeah.
We die and leave the physical body. Yes. Physically, death exists.
The question that
But then
I
what
think
is the
that,
meaning of life?
well,
And so what am I doing here? And, you know, these all sorts of questions lead us to this experience.
yeah.
And I can only speak for my experience, but that there is so much more
Yeah.
than this body, than the name that people call me. You know, and I've told you before about I was working with a mentor for some time that never addressed me by my name. In 9 months, never addressed me by my name.
Yeah.
And it used to egoically challenge me. I've got a name, call me by my name. But, you know, it was pure identification with me and this body that would tweak me. But these sorts of, sorry, I digress, but, you know, it's the death of that part of us that took, the death of the body is not the death of the part of us that took birth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that our relationship in observing nature and seeing rebirth and renewal over and over again can really support this line of inquiry to support our spiritualization as to who we really are, and then loosen the grip of fear of death, because it's really a fear of attachment to worldliness.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing, I think, is that there's, you know, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm scared of death because they're gone. I'm not going to be able to talk to them anymore." But even that's not true, because those people that I've worked with that really deeply connect from the moment of death to in over the weeks after, um, that there's an awareness of that being that remains with them if they want it to, so that, you know, that time seems to stop, that separation from death and not death seems to become irrelevant. You know, there was somebody that died in 2020 that I dearly loved, and sometimes he comes, you know, and I'm like, oh, hello, there he
Yeah,
is, you know.
beautiful, so beautiful. And it's not that death's not painful, because to lose somebody we love is incredibly painful. Because the more we love, the more painful it's going to be. Love's painful.
Hmm.
But we're not fully alive when we're afraid of what hasn't come. We're not fully alive when we're afraid of how we think it might be. So we pretend. We pretend it's not going to happen and put all of our energy and resources into making sure that it doesn't. And it will.
Yeah.
And that's really, you know, that's being so bound up with egoically identifying with who we are too.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that we've got to focus on, is just eliminate. Some people will call it an ego death. I don't think the ego will ever die until the body dies, because it's the survival mechanism. But
Yeah. We need an
truly,
ego. We need it.
yeah,
It's good.
absolutely.
It's good.
But putting
Got to
it in
keep
its
it in
right
its
place.
place.
Yeah, exactly. Putting it in its right place, knowing where it should exist and where it's as it is for a lot of people trying to take over everything, but just going, no, that's your place there, and this is the truth of who I am, and that leads to incredible freedom, I believe.
Yeah. And then for that freedom to be able to inform us
Yeah.
of, then it becomes far simpler to know what we want.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I think that's a good place to stop.
Absolutely.
So come again next time. We are going to take this journey deeper and deeper into the sense of wisdom, into the sense of health that extends beyond third dimensional reality, and really explore what's possible for all of us from the point of view of our consciousness. Thanks, Deepika.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for listening too.
Yeah, beautiful.